The skyline of New York shimmered like a sheet of glass as the morning sun poured over the city. From the 42nd floor of Harrison Industries, the view stretched endlessly, steel towers stabbing the sky, the Hudson glinting like liquid silver, and the constant hum of life far below. Inside, however, the boardroom was not calm. Michael Harrison's shoes beat a restless rhythm against the polished oak floor. As he paced back and forth, his tie pulled loose, his brow heavy with sweat. His phone still glowed with the message that had detonated like a grenade in his hands. Only minutes earlier, Mr. Harrison, I'm terribly sorry. Food poisoning. Cannot make it to translate today. Emergency room. Dash Thomas. Michael read it again, as if repetition might somehow change the words. His chest tightened. Not today. Not now. He had fought too hard, too long, for this moment. 18 months of strategy calls that ran past midnight. Countless presentations, revised again and again until every slide gleamed like polished marble. Hundreds of sleepless nights building toward this single day. And now, without Thomas, the only man he trusted to navigate the delicate barrier of language, the entire empire he built could be undone. He paused at the head of the long mahogany table, his hand pressing hard against the glossy surface as though it could anchor him against the storm raging inside. At 55, Michael still carried the sharpness of a man who had clawed his way up from nothing. He had built Harrison Industries out of a dusty garage with nothing but a second-hand computer and an idea. From there, through grit and sheer refusal to quit, he had turned that idea into a $200 million corporation. He had seen obstacles before, but never one like this. This was not a battle of markets or numbers. This was a battle of words, and without them, he was defenseless. The door burst open and Rachel Martinez, his assistant, hurried in, her usually immaculate appearance undone by panic. Her dark hair, always pinned neatly, slipped loose over her shoulders, and her blouse clung with the sheen of nervous perspiration. "Sir, I've called every translation service in the city," she gasped, clutching her phone as if squeezing it might force it to give her a miracle. "Everyone is booked, or sick, or they can't possibly make it here in under 2 hours." Michael's eyes hardened. "What about the universities? The French department at Columbia, NYU?" "I tried," Rachel said, her voice cracking under the weight of her own failure. "The French consulate referred us back to the same services, and Columbia is closed for faculty meetings. There's no one left to call." Michael's throat constricted. Postpone? The thought chilled him. He knew what Laurent and Dubois had said today, or never. They flew back to Paris tonight. If he failed to impress them now, 18 months of sweat would vanish like mist on the Hudson. Worse, his revolutionary AI healthcare platform, the project that could save lives across Europe, would never see the light of day. He pressed his palms against the table, his knuckles whitening. Around him, the boardroom felt colder, emptier. The silent rows of leather chairs seemed to stare at him with judgment, the ghostly echoes of every career that depended on him whispering through the still air. Families, livelihoods, reputations all balanced on this one meeting. Michael closed his eyes, listening to the rapid hammer of his own heart. For a moment, he wondered if this was the day the empire cracked. Then, faintly, from somewhere down the hall, came a sound so out of place that he thought he was imagining it. A voice, soft, clear, and lilting. A child's voice, carrying a melody that rose and fell with effortless grace. Words floated through the air, tender and unmistakably French. "Frère Jacques, Frère Jacques, dormez-vous, dormez-vous." Michael's eyes snapped open, his breath caught in his throat. The panic, the despair, all of it stalled mid-step. He turned toward the door, his pulse quickening for a new reason. The voice drifted closer, pure and unbroken, like sunlight cutting through a storm. Rachel looked at him, her face frozen with the same disbelief. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Michael didn't answer. He was already moving, drawn down the corridor by that voice. Because in the middle of his darkest hour, when ruin hovered just beyond the glass doors, salvation had arrived unexpected, impossible, and carried on the song of a child. Asterisk, the echo of the song faded as Michael and Rachel followed it down the corridor, their footsteps sharp against the marble, each step fueled by desperation and disbelief. Michael's lungs felt tight, not just from the panic still coursing through him, but from the fragile thread of hope pulling him forward. He rounded the corner, and there she was, small, slight, and utterly out of place against the corporate backdrop of polished steel and glass. A janitor's cart towered over her like a fortress, buckets stacked, sprays lined neatly in rows. rags folded with military precision. On the floor beside it sat a little girl, no older than 7, her dark curls tied back with a frayed pink elastic. She was humming to herself as she sorted cleaning supplies, her scuffed sneakers tucked under her faded blue dress, her lips still shaping the French words of the lullaby. Michael froze, his breath catching. The sound had been real. The French had been flawless. Rachel gasped, clutching his arm. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's her." The girl looked up, wide brown eyes fixing on them with a mix of innocence and curiosity. Her gaze was steady to steady, Michael thought, for someone so young. It was the kind of gaze that seemed to pierce through facades to see something truer beneath. Michael crouched, lowering himself to her level as if approaching something fragile, something sacred. His voice trembled despite his effort to sound calm. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" She tilted her head, not afraid, only curious, as though wondering why the powerful adults in tailored suits looked so shaken. "I'm Sophie. Sophie Rodriguez. My papa works here. He's fixing the electrical system downstairs. I'm just helping by keeping his cart neat." Michael's mind spun. This girl had no place in his world of million-dollar contracts and glass towers. And yet here she was, speaking the language that could save him. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sophie," he said carefully, "the song you were singing. Do you speak French?" Her eyes lit up, and a smile spread across her face, bright and pure. "Oui, monsieur," she answered proudly, slipping seamlessly into the language. "My mama taught me before she went to heaven 2 years ago. She was from Quebec. We read stories every night, fairy tales, newspapers, anything in French. Papa says I should keep practicing so she'll be proud of me." Rachel gasped audibly, her manicured hand flying to her chest. Michael felt the floor tilt beneath him. It was impossible. No translation service, no university professor, no diplomat, but here was a little girl fluent in French, as natural as breathing. Sophie, Michael whispered, almost afraid to hope. "How well do you really speak? Could you talk with important men from France?" The child nodded earnestly, her ponytail bouncing. "I practice every day with cartoons, with books. With Mrs. Chin at school, she knows a little French too. I like to pretend I'm giving speeches, just like Mama used to read to me." For the first time that morning, Michael felt something other than despair. He felt the stirring of possibility. It terrified him. Could he truly trust a 7-year-old with the fate of his company? Rachel leaned closer, whispering sharply, "Sir, this is madness. We can't possibly let a child. These men are sharks, Michael. They'll tear her apart." But Michael's gaze remained on Sophie, her small hands arranging bottles of cleaner with precision, her little shoulders straight, her eyes brimming with pride. She was calm where he was unraveling. In her, there was no fear, only the quiet certainty of someone who had carried her mother's legacy in silence, waiting for a moment to prove it mattered. The sound of the elevator chimming down the hall shattered the fragile quiet. Michael's pulse spiked. Tom was gone. The investors were here. He could almost hear the footsteps already marching toward the boardroom. Rachel's voice quivered. "What do we do?" Michael looked at Sophie, at the mop bucket beside her, and the ancient wisdom shining from her eyes. His decision clawed at him, absurd and desperate. But when Sophie looked up and said softly, "Monsieur, I can help if you let me," something inside him broke open. He had no translator. He had no choice. And for the first time in his life, Michael Harrison, self-made billionaire, hardened CEO, placed the weight of his empire into the hands of a janitor's daughter. The elevator door slid open at the end of the corridor, and the world began to change. The sharp metallic chime of the elevator echoed down the corridor, a sound that made every nerve in Michael Harrison's body coil tighter. His empire's future was moving closer with each hum of the machinery. He glanced at Rachel, her face pale, her breathing shallow, as though she too could already feel the presence of the 2 French investors, whose decisions carried the weight of $800 million. Then, his eyes found Sophie again. She was standing now, small hands clasped in front of her, scuffed sneakers shifting against the marble floor. Yet her posture was steady, her chin lifted with a courage that seemed out of place in someone so young. Michael studied her for a beat longer, torn between disbelief and desperate hope. Could this child really hold the line against men who had dismantled seasoned CEOs? With a single question? "Sir, this is insane," Rachel whispered urgently, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "If this goes wrong, they'll laugh us out of the room. They'll never trust you again." Michael's jaw clenched. "If we send them away, Rachel, "It's already over." Before Rachel could respond, heavy footsteps rang out security escorts, then the low murmur of French voices. The men had arrived. Michael crouched quickly beside Sophie, his heart hammering. "Listen to me, Sophie. These men, they're very important. They'll speak only French. I need you to translate everything I say, exactly as I say it. Do you think you can do that?" Her eyes, wide and luminous, fixed on his with startling calm. "Yes, monsieur. Mama always said to be brave when people are counting on you. And right now, you need me." The words pierced through Michael's panic like a blade of clarity. For a brief second, he saw not a child, but a bridge fragile yet powerful between his crumbling world and salvation. "Papa," a voice boomed from behind. It was the janitor, rolling his cart into view, his coverall stained with grease and his brow damp with sweat from work in the basement. When he saw Sophie standing with the CEO, his face drained of color. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" "She speaks French," Rachel blurted, half in shock, half in apology. Fluently. She's offering to help. The man's eyes widened, panic and fury warring inside them. "No, absolutely not. She's just a child. You can't drag her into this circus." Sophie's small hand reached for her father's. "Papa, I can do it." For Mama. Her voice was soft, but unyielding, and something instilled the man's protests. He swallowed hard, his throat working against words he couldn't say. He looked at Michael with a mixture of fear and reluctant trust. "If anything happens to her," Michael met his eyes with a solemn nod. "Nothing will. I'll protect her." The boardroom door swung open then, the force of the moment silencing every protest, every doubt. Pierre Laurent entered first, tall and severe in a tailored navy suit, his face chiseled into an expression of cold appraisal. Behind him followed Jacques Dubois, broader, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if searching for weaknesses. Their entourage trailed close, the scent of expensive cologne filling the air like a warning. Laurent's lips curled the moment his gaze landed on Sophie by Michael's side. He muttered something in clipped French to Dubois, and both men shared a look that dripped with disdain. Rachel stiffened. "They're asking if this is a joke," she whispered. Michael's stomach twisted, but before he could open his mouth, Sophie stepped forward, her tiny frame dwarfed by the men towering over her. She spoke in flawless, lilting French, her tone polite yet confident. "Messieurs, my name is Sophie Rodriguez. I will be your translator today. Please take your seats. Monsieur Harrison is ready to begin." The room froze. Even Rachel's breath hitched. The Frenchman blinked, surprised by the purity of the accent, the certainty in the child's voice. Dubois arched a brow and muttered to Laurent, this time with intrigue rather than contempt. Reluctantly, they moved to their seats at the long mahogany table. Michael followed, his pulse racing. He had expected ridicule, collapse, disaster. Instead, there was silence, heavy, tense, but filled with possibility. He began his pitch, his voice low but steady. "Sophie," he murmured, "tell them this is not just software. It is a revolution for healthcare." She nodded, her words flowing like silk as she translated, not missing a beat. Laurent's eyes flicked to her, then back to Michael. The suspicion in his gaze softened, just slightly. But as the presentation continued, the investors began to test her. Subtle questions slipped into their responses, questions that weren't part of Michael's pitch at all. "What is your opinion of France's healthcare structure?" Dubois asked suddenly, his tone probing. Sophie did not falter. She straightened in her chair, her young voice carrying wisdom far beyond her years. "My mother used to say that systems are only as strong as the people they serve. France's system has strength, but it must keep listening to the needs of families, not just governments." The investors exchanged a glance. For the first time, one of them smiled. Michael's chest tightened with awe and fear. Sophie wasn't just translating, she was guiding, shaping, elevating the conversation with an instinct no seasoned professional could match. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The real test was coming, and when it did, everything his company, Sophie's safety, even his own reputation would hang in the balance of a child's courage. The boardroom felt less like a place of business now, and more like a battlefield, with Sophie standing at its center as the most unlikely soldier he had ever seen. The air inside the boardroom grew heavy, thick with unspoken doubts. Every tick of the grand clock on the wall felt like a hammer against Michael Harrison's ribs. He stole a glance at Sophie, seated on the leather chair that seemed to swallow her small frame whole. She looked impossibly calm, hands folded neatly, her feet barely brushing the polished floor. Yet when she spoke, It was as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. Michael pressed forward with his pitch. He outlined the AI-driven platform, the algorithms capable of predicting illnesses weeks before symptoms appeared, the potential to save lives across Europe. His voice was steady, rehearsed from countless sleepless nights. But the words were not enough, he knew it, and so did the men across the table. Pierre Laurent leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jacques Dubois tapped a pen against his folder, each click loud and disapproving. Then Dubois spoke in French, his tone sharp and dismissive. "We have heard many claims, Monsieur Harrison. Most collapse under scrutiny. What makes you think your company can survive where others have failed?" Michael froze. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the tone: skepticism, disdain, the slow dismantling of everything he built. His throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no sound came before panic could devour him. Sophie's clear voice cut through the tension. She translated the question calmly, then turned back to the investors. Her tiny hands rested on the table, steady as stone. "My mama used to say that real strength is not about being the biggest or the loudest. It is about being the one who refuses to give up when others do. That is what Monsieur Harrison's company has done. He never gave up. Not even when he started in a garage with nothing but an idea. That is why it will survive." The room fell silent. Laurent's brow arched slightly, the faintest flicker of curiosity breaking his mask. Michael's heart pounded. Those were not his words. They were hers, simple, human, yet more powerful than anything he could have scripted. He leaned forward, seizing the moment. "Translate this, Sophie," he said softly. Tell them this company isn't just about profit. It's about lives. It's about a promise that technology will serve people, not the other way around." Sophie nodded, her French flowing like water. The investors listened, their guarded postures easing, if only slightly. But then Laurent spoke, his words quick and cutting. His voice carried a challenge, the kind that hadn't done many before. Rachel leaned in, whispering frantically, "He's questioning your financial stability. He wants proof you won't burn through the investment in 6 months. Michael's stomach churned. The numbers, the projections, he had them all, but he needed to present them flawlessly, or it would mean nothing. He started to speak, but Laurent cut him off, switching to a complex, rapid-fire French that made Rachel blanch. Sophie's brow furrowed for the first time. She listened carefully, then translated. "He says he wants to test me. If I cannot handle his questions, then you cannot handle his money." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Michael's pulse spiked. He wanted to object, to shield her, but Sophie lifted her chin, her small shoulders squared. "Monsieur Harrison," she whispered without breaking her gaze from Laurent, "let me answer. Trust me, and then, in perfect French, she began to respond directly. She quoted articles her mother had once read to her, citing examples of healthcare innovations in Quebec and Europe. She explained how Harrison's platform wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, but a scalable model tested on pilot programs in New York clinics. Her tone was not defensive, it was calm, assured, unshaken by the weight of the challenge. The investors leaned in now, no longer seeing a child, but a force. Dubois's pen stilled. Laurent's frown deepened into thought. The silence in the room was no longer skeptical, it was captivated. Michael sat back, almost disbelieving what he was witnessing. Every doubt, every fear he had clung to, was unraveling before his eyes. Sophie wasn't just holding her own. She was winning them over, but just as hope surged in Michael's chest, Laurent closed his folder with a snap. He exchanged a glance with Dubois and muttered something that made Rachel stiffen. What did he say? Michael whispered. Rachel's lips trembled. He said this is entertaining, but he doesn't make decisions based on children's words. He wants proof that you are a leader worth trusting. The fragile thread of progress snapped. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. The investors were turning cold again. Sophie's brilliance had bought them time, but the storm was not over. And then, as the silence thickened, Sophie did something no one expected. She rose from her chair, small hands gripping the edge of the table. Her voice, steady and sure, rang out in flawless French. "Monsieur Laurent, Monsieur Dubois, my papa fixes broken things in this building every day. He doesn't have millions of dollars, but he has something better. He keeps his promises. I believe Monsieur Harrison is the same. And if you cannot see that, then maybe you are not the partners he needs." Gasps rippled across the room. Rachel's eyes went wide. Michael's jaw dropped. The Frenchman stared at her, shocked into silence. For the first time in his life, Michael Harrison realized the fate of his empire no longer rested in his own hands. It rested in the courage of a janitor's daughter who dared to speak truth to power. The meeting was far from over, but the battlefield had shifted and so had the balance of power. The silence after Sophie's words was deafening. It hung in the air like smoke after a cannon blast, choking the boardroom in shock and disbelief. No one moved, not even Michael. His pulse hammered in his ears as he watched the scene unfold. Two of the most powerful men in European finance staring, not at him, but at a child. Pierre Laurent's lips parted first. He muttered something in French so low that only Du Bois heard. The broader man leaned back in his chair, studying Sophie with a new kind of interest, his sharp eyes narrowing as if reassessing everything he thought he knew about Harrison Industries. Rachel clutched Michael's arm, her nails digging through the fabric of his suit. "Sir," she whispered, barely breathing. She just called them out, in front of their own entourage. They're either going to walk out or... She didn't finish the thought, but her eyes betrayed that they might actually stay. Sophie didn't sit back down. Her small figure stood at the head of the table, her palms resting firmly on the mahogany as though it were her rightful place. Her tiny voice carried the weight of conviction that silenced the seasoned executives around her. Michael swallowed hard. He had never been so proud and yet so terrified. If Laurent chose to humiliate her now, it wouldn't just shatter her, it would bury Harrison Industries in the rubble. Du Bois finally leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He spoke slowly, in French, each word deliberate. Rachel's breath caught as she translated under her breath. "He says he wants to hear more. He wants to test her." Michael's stomach dropped. He wanted to protest, to shield Sophie, but before he could open his mouth, Sophie answered in flawless French, her tone calm and composed. "Very well, monsieur. Ask me what you will." The room stirred. Laurent's eyebrows arched with surprise, then dark amusement. He asked the first question, his voice like a blade. "What is the greatest weakness of America's healthcare system?" Sophie didn't hesitate. Her answer flowed like water, citing not just facts but human stories. She spoke of her mother's experiences in hospitals, of families crushed by bills, of a system that often forgot the people at its center. Her words were sharp but empathetic, carrying both knowledge and heart. The entourage shifted uneasily. Du Bois leaned forward, his skepticism softening. Laurent's pen, poised to strike, paused midair, but they weren't finished. Laurent's next question came faster. A trap disguised as curiosity, and how would Monsieur Harrison's technology address this? If at all. Michael felt sweat bead at his temple. This was at the pivot point that could destroy everything. He prayed Sophie wouldn't falter. The child smiled faintly, a memory lighting her eyes. "My mama always said a good doctor listens before prescribing. Monsieur Harrison's platform is like that. It listens first. It gathers data from millions of patients, quietly, respectfully, and only then does it act. That is its strength." Her words rippled through the room like a bell's toll. Du Bois leaned back, nodding slightly. Laurent's stern mask cracked, just for a moment. Michael exhaled shakily, all coursing through him. This little girl was not just translating. She was breathing life into his vision, dressing it in humanity he had almost forgotten. But then suspense struck like lightning. Laurent snapped his folder shut and muttered something curt, his tone dismissive. Rachel's face drained of color. "He says, numbers don't lie. He wants proof." Now, Michael's chest tightened. He had the numbers, yes, charts, projections, financial models. But he knew what Laurent was doing. He wasn't asking for data. He was daring Michael to stumble in front of his child prodigy translator. Rachel slid the documents across the table with trembling hands. Michael began explaining the figures, his voice steady, but clipped, his eyes darting to Sophie for each translation. She kept pace, her French precise and elegant, transforming the cold figures into a story of growth and sustainability. Yet Laurent's expression didn't change. He scribbled something, then whispered to Du Bois. They shared a glance, silent communication honed by decades of deals. Michael's heart pounded. He could feel the deal slipping away again, and then Sophie did something that froze the room. She stepped closer to Laurent, looking him directly in the eye, unflinching. In a clear, unwavering voice, she said in French, "Monsieur, you asked for proof. But proof is not always numbers. Proof is trust. My papa fixes things here every night. He has no spreadsheets, no charts. But when a light is broken, He fixes it. That is proof. Monsieur Harrison fixes broken systems. That is also proof. Laurent blinked. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his cold eyes. Du Bois chuckled softly under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. Michael's throat tightened. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't earned it. But somehow, Sophie had shifted the battlefield again, stripping away their armor of cynicism with the blunt weapon of truth. The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous, but filled with possibility. Michael knew one thing. The investors were no longer testing him. They were testing her dot, and if Sophie faltered now, the empire he had built tanned her fragile. Brilliant courage would shatter in the same breath. The tension in the boardroom had grown so thick it seemed to suffocate the very air. Michael's pulse thundered as though it were trying to break free of his chest. For a fleeting moment, Sophie's words had pierced the armor of the investors, softening their rigid expressions. But Michael knew men like Laurent and Du Bois didn't yield easily. They were not here to be charmed, they were here to see if he could survive the furnace. Laurent leaned back, his gaze dark and calculating, and spoke again in rapid French. His voice was calm, but the undertone was sharp as glass. Sophie listened, her brow furrowing slightly, then turned to Michael. He says. She translated softly, that business is war. That charm will not protect you when competitors come with sharper swords. He asks, are you a commander or just a dreamer? Michael felt his throat tighten. He knew the trap. Laurent wanted to force him into arrogance or into admitting weakness. Either answer could sink him. He swallowed hard, searching for words, but Sophie placed a small hand on his sleeve, steadying him with surprising strength. Say what you believe, she whispered, not what you think they want. Her eyes were steady, carrying a weight of wisdom far beyond her 7 years. Michael exhaled slowly and nodded. He leaned forward, meeting Laurent's icy stare head-on. Tell him, Michael said, his voice rough but firm, that I am not a soldier. I am a builder. War destroys, but builders leave something that outlives them. Sophie's translation carried the weight of his conviction, every syllable ringing with clarity. The Frenchmen exchanged glances. Du Bois' lips twitched, as if fighting the urge to smile, while Laurent remained still, unreadable. Then, without warning, Laurent launched into another barrage of French. Faster this time, his tone sharp and cutting. Sophie's small shoulders tensed, her young face tightening in concentration. Michael's gut twisted. This was no longer about the company. This was about her. Laurent was probing, testing, trying to break the child standing before him. The questions came like bullets, details about European healthcare regulations, references to French literature, even obscure political phrases. Each one designed to trip her, to expose her as a fraud, but Sophie didn't falter. She answered with quiet confidence, drawing from the bedtime stories her mother once read, from the lessons tucked into her memories. She quoted Les Miserables when asked about French resilience. She spoke of compassion when asked about politics. And when Laurent demanded a metaphor for innovation, she smiled and said, it is like my papa's work. He takes something broken and makes it new again. Monsieur Harrison does the same, only with ideas instead of wires. The room was stunned into silence. Du Bois' eyes gleamed with admiration now. Laurent, for the first time, seemed unsettled, his pen frozen above the page. Michael sat back, his chest heaving with pride and awe. The child had just done what no seasoned executive had ever managed. She had cornered Laurent, not with aggression, but with truth so simple it stripped away all pretense. But just as the tide seemed to turn, Laurent's jaw tightened. He muttered a few cold words, then slid a folder across the table. The papers inside spilled slightly, revealing lines of dense legal French. Rachel glanced at them and paled. Sir, it's a hidden clause. They're trying to trap you. If you sign this, you'll lose controlling interest within a year. Michael's stomach sank. He had prepared for everything: financials, projections, demonstrations, but not betrayal hidden in fine print. He stared at the contract, his mind scrambling. Without Thomas, his translator, he couldn't catch every nuance. He could walk straight into ruin. But before panic swallowed him whole, Sophie leaned forward. She scanned the document, her lips moving as her eyes danced over the words. Then she looked up, her voice calm, but resolute. This clause is dishonest, she declared in French, her tone sharper than any Michael had heard from her before. It gives you power you did not earn. My mama taught me French, and she taught me honesty. If you expect us to sign this, then you do not deserve to sit at this table. The words struck like lightning. The entire room went still, jaws slack with disbelief. A 7-year-old had just exposed a trap that seasoned lawyers had buried in a sea of legal jargon. Michael's chest swelled with a mix of terror and pride. He knew the risk calling out men like Laurent could destroy everything. But as he looked at Sophie, standing small yet unshaken, he realized something profound. She was not here to play their game. She was here to change it. Du Bois broke the silence first. He threw back his head and laughed, a deep, rolling laugh that filled the boardroom. He clapped his hands together once, sharply, and said something to Laurent in French, his tone mocking. Rachel whispered the translation, her voice trembling. He said, "Even your trap was too small for her." Laurent's face darkened, the muscles in his jaw twitching. He closed the folder slowly, his eyes locked on Sophie as if reassessing her not as a child, but as an equal adversary. The balance of power had shifted again, but dangerously so. The deal teetered on a knife's edge. One more word, one more misstep could send it all crashing down. Michael's hands tightened into fists under the table. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if he was the one saving his company or if it was a janitor's daughter standing in the fire for him. The next move would decide everything. The boardroom had become a crucible. Every breath, every flicker of movement carried the weight of history being written. The walls of glass looked out over New York, but inside, the empire of Harrison Industries hung in fragile balance between salvation and ruin. Michael Harrison, a man who had fought for decades to rise from obscurity, sat at the head of the table with his heart in his throat, knowing that his fate was no longer his own. It now rested in the small hands of Sophie Rodriguez, a janitor's daughter with the courage of a warrior. Laurent's stare burned across the polished wood, his eyes fixed on Sophie as though she were an anomaly he couldn't explain. Du Bois, in contrast, leaned back, his arms crossed, but his expression alive with something like amusement, or even admiration. The entourage behind them whispered, restless, shifting in their seats as if they, too, could feel the tide turning. Laurent finally broke the silence, his voice low, sharp, and unyielding. He spoke in French, each word like a scalpel. Rachel stiffened as she whispered the translation. He says, "Negotiations are not for children. He says wisdom is earned, not borrowed, and he will not entrust $800 million to fairy tales told by a girl." The words sliced through the air, and Michael's stomach lurched. He opened his mouth, ready to fight back, but Sophie stepped forward before he could. Her tiny hands gripped the edge of the table, her chin lifted, her eyes blazing with fire. "Monsieur Laurent," she said in perfect French, her voice clear as crystal, "if you believe wisdom only comes with age, then you have already forgotten the greatest lesson of all. Honesty needs no ears, only courage." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Du Bois leaned forward, his interest piqued. Laurent's jaw tightened, but Sophie pressed on, her voice steady, unwavering. "You tried to hide poison in your contract, but I saw it. You tested me with questions meant to trap me, but I answered. And now I ask you, what else do you fear? That a child can see what you cannot? That the truth is stronger than all your money?" The words landed like thunder. Michael sat frozen, his heart pounding, as if the walls themselves might shatter under the force of Sophie's defiance. Du Bois broke first. He chuckled, then laughed outright, clapping his hand against the table. "Magnifique!" he exclaimed in French, his voice booming. "She is the bravest translator I have ever met, and the wisest." Laurent's face darkened, but the room's energy had shifted. For the first time, the investors weren't in control. A 7-year-old girl was. Michael leaned forward, seizing the moment, his own voice low but urgent. "Tell them this company doesn't need investors who play games with hidden clauses. Tell them we want partners who share our vision, not parasites who seek to control it." Sophie translated flawlessly, her voice echoing with authority far beyond her years. Laurent's knuckles whitened as he clenched his pen. Du Bois, however, rose to his feet. He extended his hand across the table, not to Michael, but to Sophie, Mademoiselle. He said warmly, "You have done what no one else has ever managed. You reminded us what this business is really about: truth. On that truth, I am prepared to sign." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Michael felt his knees weaken with relief so powerful it nearly dropped him to the floor. Laurent stood slowly, his face a mask of thunder. He looked at Du Bois, then at Sophie, and finally at Michael. After a long, tense pause, he closed the contract folder with a snap and gave a curt nod. "Just being," he muttered. Very well. The deal was sealed not by corporate lawyers, not by polished executives, but by the honesty of a child who had refused to be silenced. As cameras flashed and the boardroom filled with the buzz of victory, Michael turned to Sophie. He knelt so their eyes met, his voice thick with gratitude. Sophie, you didn't just save my company. You reminded me what it means to fight for something real. You reminded me that courage can come from anywhere. Her father stood in the doorway, his coverall still streaked with grease, his eyes wet with pride and disbelief. For years, he had worked unseen in the shadows of this building, fixing what was broken. Now, his daughter had fixed what even he could not, the future of an empire. The investors signed the agreement. The deal was done. But the true story wasn't about money. It was about a little girl who had carried her mother's legacy into a room of giants and proved that truth, spoken with courage, could bring the mighty to their knees. When Sophie finally left the boardroom, her small hand clasped in her father's. The men who had once doubted her stood in silence, watching her go. Even Laurent's gaze softened, though he would never admit it aloud. Michael Harrison remained at the table, staring at the signed contract, but his thoughts weren't on the numbers, the profit, or the empire. They were on Sophie's words. Honesty needs no ears, only courage, and he knew, deep in his bones, that the most powerful moment of his entire career had not been winning the deal. It had been watching the janitor's daughter, no taller than the table itself, stand against billionaires and win with nothing but truth, asterisk.